about 8:30, a couple guys walked in and said, "Hey, sorry to disturb you, but we just want to let you know, two airplanes just ran into the World Trade Center." I'm like, holy crap. And then about 7 minutes later, boom. And so I was on in the fourth corridor, C ring, fourth floor.
F-14 Tomcat radio show.
Tomcat audible. Tomcat ball 6-0. Roger ball.
Hello and welcome to the F-14 Tomcat All Things Grumman Radio Show podcast, straight out of Calverton, where all 712 F-14 Tomcats were built, along with 994 Grumman A6 intruders, 170 EA-6B Prowlers, 313 E-2C Hawkeyes, totaling 2,189 airframes, built and designed to work together, drafted together from Grumman Bethpage, delivered to the fleet, is a rarity, in any company would build and assemble an actual strike package for a Navy abroad in any country. Grumman was second to none with this. We decided to put a strike force show together, go through each airframe, get a representative involved from the E2, from the EA-6B, from the A6, the F-14, of course, with Leakster and Siphon. So we headed out to the fleet and we found some amazing veterans with incredible careers behind each airframe, and we're proud to bring them together, share that with you, and we're going to do an introduction of our guest pilots tonight, and we're going to start with the E2, and we have Captain Eric Biff Gardner with us.
Hey, great to be here, Lorenzo.
Thank you. Joining us for the EA-6B Prowler is Captain Rob Ice Gamberg, the XO of CVN 69 Ike. On the A6, we're joined by Tony Roller Roloff.
Very glad to be here with you guys. Yes, very glad. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And of course, we have our crew, our regular co-host, and that's Leakster from the VF-102 Diamondbacks in the F-14A, and also Siphon from the F-14D in VF-31, the Tomcatters. And that voice you're all used to. He's smooth, he's cool, he's world famous, and it's Brian from the Pukin Dogs. He's our maintainer tonight.
As always, it's good to be here with you guys.
We're looking here to present a show where we're going to talk about each airframe individually. We're going to go through, spend a few minutes before we do that, and go through these careers of these veterans. I mean, it's amazing the hard work they put in, and, talking to them privately before the show and stuff, where they all went with their careers, it's absolutely amazing. It's not something you would think when you'd say, he flew an E2. Went to a lot of places with that E2 and took it to war, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So I'm going to turn it over to Leakster and Siphon.
I'm pretty excited about this show because, when I look at the careers that these guys have had, I see that they're cold warriors like I was, and there really isn't. I guess we're all getting kind of old now to remember what it was like to know that when we signed up that we were talking about, World War III. It was kind of a different time to join the military. And I was looking at Biff's resume here in Top Dome in 1991, and we got to hear what that's all about, because I don't think too many folks would know what is Top Dome. Can you tell us that one, sir?
So Top Dome it was CAWS, Carrier Airborne Early Warning Weapons School. So E2s wanted to stand up a weapons school, a higher level, advanced level training, greater than what the RAG was. So I think it stood up in 1989. So I was like the second group of people coming in. So I'd done a couple cruises on Ike. Finished up with Desert Shield and rolled into CAWS, at which it was based there at Miramar. So obviously Top Gun was at Miramar, and we became Top Dome. But it was CAWS, and I was there for 3 years as an instructor, did electronic warfare and strike warfare training. And it was back when Miramar was as it was in the greatest of times in the late 80s, early 90s. I am a survivor of Tailhook 91.
There were many years
on,
you wouldn't admit to that.
I know.
He's got a T-shirt.
I got the patch and got the T-shirt and still made 06. So it's good. But yeah, Miramar was quite the time. Loved being stationed there. My first tour was in Norfolk in VAW 121, and actually all three of my operational cruises or operational deployments squadrons were on East Coast, so that was a good chance to get out there and do 3 years in San Diego while it was still NAS Miramar before Pat Schroeder.
So you saw quite a bit of upgrades on the E2 capabilities while you were doing that, I would imagine. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I was the first airplane I flew in the RAG, coming through as a baby mole, as we got called, because we were in the back of the tube. APS 125 radar. I think the computer itself had 108K of memory. So
wow.
So that was the computer was about 4 foot by 4 foot and had little slots of big metal memory things that you'd put in there.
Yeah.
And it was 108K of memory was that the first one I flew.
I'm pretty sure my Apple IIe had better processing power.
Yeah. I remember we'd be on missions and we'd fly with a toolkit, and if the computer went down and it wouldn't boot up right, you'd jump out of your seat and go there and open up the computer, pull it out, and it was basically a reel-to-reel tape, and you'd spin it with your finger to get it, move it to a different spot, get it set, then put it back in and reload it and go. So That was pretty amazing stuff.
Was there a kick here sticker?
What's that?
Was there a kick here sticker?
Yeah, we did a lot of that on those boxes took a lot of beatings up and down as maintainers brought them up and down from the avionics shop and dragging them up the ladder wells and banging them onto the flight deck and into the airplane and locking them in and locking them out.
There was a lot of interesting things about the E2 that I don't think a lot of folks realize is that, first of all, you've got how many guys in the back? You have 3 moles in the back. Is that correct?
That's right. So you had 2 pilots up front and 3 NFOs in the back. And one was a mission commander, one was an air control officer, and one was the radar operator as the 3 different roles.
Mm-hmm. And the other interesting thing is that the cooling on that airplane required massive amounts of cooling, right? I mean, you have this huge, for some reason, I seem to remember that the cooling system was actually secret for many years, and there was a huge intake on top to bring all that cool air flow.
Yeah, you had a vapor cycle, which is basically a refrigeration cycle that cooled everything, but you had a radar that was generating 1 megawatt of power and generating all of that waveform and the computer and everything else to have it keep it cool.
Was it true what they told us about you guys could see arcing in there with metal on the cabin or et cetera from the radar itself?
The pilots could up front, and that's in the early 90s, the Group 1 and Group 2 versions, they got gold plated to try to keep out some of that.
Wow. I was going to ask,
which is why E2 people have mostly girls.
That was the joke.
I was going to say he's smiling while he's saying all of this.
I have 2 girls,
and it only gets worse for the Prowler guys, right? So,
yeah.
I was going to ask, as a
the Prowler guys adopt.
Yeah, right. As a fellow foe, I tell you, it was the most calming thing to hear the air intercept controller just have the bead of, I got what's going on, this calm voice just coming across. And it felt like you guys really had the God's eye view. I mean, you had the God's eye view, but you had you had the SA to be able to say everything that's going around. And do I recall correctly that your radar horizon was really only limited by the altitude of the aircraft?
Yeah, basically. I mean, some of it was a little bit of in the older versions. It was also you could send out the pulse, but you had to, it was timing wise that you couldn't let it go too far. So initially it was about 250 miles, then it went out to about 350 in different, depending on the PRF of the radar. So it was more physics driven than altitude driven.
Yeah, at some point the update rate just becomes too long, right?
Yeah.
So what?
But the the E2D now is a pretty amazing piece of machinery. It's basically an Aegis radar up in the sky now.
It's amazing.
Plus the data link capabilities that they have nowadays, it's just the whole world is wide open for these guys for situational awareness compared to what we dealt with back in those days, I think. One of the scariest things that I ever did in the Navy was I had the pleasure of, I was an LSO and I was flying off the ship during a carrier qual period, and I rode in the back of an E2 at night for a night catapult shot. And I can
You
tell
really wanted to get home?
well, you're young and your wife or girlfriend's waiting for you. Yes, of course you want to get off that ship.
Let's try this.
But
what could go wrong?
so I had gone through the training, so I was qualified to go off in the E2, but it was one of the more frightening experiences of my life because you're in this tube, it's dark, there's no ejection seat, and the hatch is open or not open, and there's only one way out of the airplane if it goes in the water, and it's going to be very confusing and violent and etc. So you guys had a lot of stones riding in the back of that thing at night, especially with a bunch of young guys flying it. Did you think about that at the time, or was it just?
Well, I survived 850 traps. I didn't do 800. I survived them, and so I. As an XO or CO and riding with a couple of young, obviously you always had a capsy or a plane commander riding in left or right seat. But when you had a younger guy in the left seat, senior lieutenant or lieutenant commander in the right seat watching him. But yeah, there was a couple ones you feel, and then you finally land and go down and watch the flat tape, and you're like, oh shit, I was riding through that. You got Joey Chitwood going one wheel down the angle deck and boltering, and it was like,
yeah. For us as an LSO, the E2 was the largest wingspan to bring aboard, so we were very, you really had to make sure those guys were on centerline, but it was in my opinion, one of the safer airplanes to land on the carrier with the instantaneous power. So you guys had but it would make about 17 corrections in 15 seconds. So
right. You just watch the camera footage in the cockpit of it. I mean, there's all over the place. I mean, it's
right.
Yeah.
They drink too much coffee.
Holy cow, it's like jitters.
It's a Red Bull commercial.
Wow.
I always wondered when I was waving, how the E2 could be high and low at the same time.
Well, one wing's high and one wing's low. I mean,
Wow.
So let's move on to the Prowler. Ice, what do you how many traps did you get in that thing?
Well, I don't know how many were in the Prowler, but at the end of the day, I think I had like 1085, 1090, something like that traps.
Wow.
So, awesome. Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me?
1,000 trap club.
I stayed at sea a long time. I was a horrible staff officer, so they kept sending me back to sea.
That's a good deal.
It's about all I could do well.
Don't throw me back in the fire patch.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I was pretty lucky. I got to fly Prowlers for a long daggum time, a little over 3,000 hours in the Prowler, and it was a great time to show up in the Prowler community. Because I remember my first squadron, our first two deployments were on Lincoln. It was Lincoln's first two deployments, and rolled into my squadron and had 5 brand new Prowlers, darn near sequential bureau numbers. Which was just
beautiful.
So I mean, showroom fresh Prowlers, if you can imagine that, way back in the day. And
that new airplane smell.
1991.
I remember.
it was pretty daggum sweet. So we we just flew the heck out of those daggum things. They worked well, and that jet served me well for a long time. So, and then I was lucky enough to get to step into the Growler later in life. So
Oh, wow.
participated in the development of the daggum thing, and then got to turn back around and got to fly it. Certainly on my last deployment on TR, going around the world as chief of staff. Still got to fly a couple days a week.
That's awesome.
And, rhinos and growlers.
So have they decided which one's faster yet? Because I think maybe a Prowler could be faster than a than a Growler sometimes. To be honest with you,
Yeah, I was going to say, man, there's some aerodynamic considerations there.
What I'm curious on is the F-18 took your job, Leakster, and the F-18 took Ice's job. Biff, there's going to be a Hornet coming with a radome real soon. It's just a matter of time.
That's not happening.
Actually, if you link three Hornets together, all with Ace, you basically get. No, I'm joking.
Daddling 3 Hornets, you got your Hawkeye.
So one of the
And you only got 30 minutes of flight time though.
There's that.
You're very excited when you're a young fighter pilot and you get to go fly the F-14 and you're all excited about shooting missiles. But I didn't get to shoot that many missiles as a fighter pilot. But when I did go to Iraq, these Prowler guys were launching missiles left and right. They got to shoot a ton more missiles than I did. And the missiles that they shot, those HARMs, are some of the biggest missiles we shoot. It's there. What can you tell us about that, Ice?
It's a very unique experience to, like you said, it's a big missile. It's 1,000-pound daggum missile that's going to accelerate to, well over, Mach 2 towards Mach 3 on its way. So when you launch the daggum thing, I mean, the jet shudders and it rumbles right off. And what really surprised you the first time you shoot one is to watch it get out from the jet and just hit pure vertical, because it gets up high, particularly if you're taking a longer range shot to get it down range. And like, God dang, that was pretty daggum cool. So a couple, for me, first time I got to shoot one was actually in training. As a young knucklehead lieutenant, I was got handed the task of shooting the squadron's first ever missile. I'm like, how the heck do we do that? And not only do we want to do it, we want to do it down at China Lake and don't screw it up.
On the instrumented range?
Yeah, on the instrumented range. So I got handed a telemetry missile against an emitter that we weren't supposed to be able to hit, that a certain country had and could put in certain modes, and they wanted to see how close we could get to the daggum thing. So there's a lot of additional planning factors in that. We'd never shot a missile before, so I went trundling down to the A6 radio room. Hey, dudes, how do I plan a freaking missile X? And they helped me step through the process and do it. And the missile performed just incredibly well, much more so than anybody thought it would. And no kidding, it went right through the daggum antenna on this thing, even in a mode that we didn't think it would hit. So, a lot of data analysis after the fact from the smart folks down in China Lake, but really, for me, it kind of changed my perception of, okay, what can we expect when we do send this thing down range, and this daggum thing's going to do what it needs to do. And you talk about having to shoot a lot of missiles, just kind of the nature of the suppression missing, with a HARM missile, trying to create a window of opportunity for folks to get in through a threat ring. I mean, that takes you got to put quite a few missiles down range to open up, that suppression window for guys to get in and do what they got to do and get back out again. That coupled with the jamming. And then for us in the Prowler, we would hold some missiles generally in reserve to take kind of reactive shots for things that popped up or unexpected, because it was easier for us to see what was going on with that and take that quick reaction shot. So a little bit of a different flavor to it when you're trying to do that, from a Prowler versus trying to do that from a Hornet or an A6 or something.
There's another thing I think people don't consider when we talk about those kind of things is, I can tell you that I was a junior guy, so my first strikes that I got to do were at night. And you can't see anything out there, and then you're counting down for the HARM shot, and the whole place lights up like crazy, right? And then you see a bunch of rockets going to the moon. It's a different deal to shoot a missile like that at night than in the daytime, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it just, you're not going to see anything for a while. You got to talk yourself into closing your daggum eyes.
Speaking of closing their eyes.
Yeah, what altitude are you closing your eyes at?
We got Tony Roloff here, and since he's a former LSO, we know he's blind as a bat. But I know that when he was flying the A6, you guys carried an eye patch or something along those lines, and I know it wasn't for playing pirate on your cross countries or whatever.
Well, it was for port calls, so that's another story. I don't know if I can really talk about that here. But
That's the below decks.
That was the Subic patch?
Yeah. I was writing down a few notes here. It's just really cool, some of the history here. It made me thinking about a lot of stuff that I haven't thought about in a long time. One was I forgot who said it, the black camera, we called it the Daredevil channel. And I was on cruise with the TR. I mean, it was like, we pull up, we go to Mid-Rat, we turn it on, and we'd say, okay, who's up next? Okay, well, this should be a good one. He's got 3 no grades in a row. But anyways, I was right. Actually, really good entertainment. I was thinking about shooting at the missiles and stuff. And when I got A6s out of Kingsville, Texas, when I graduated, I was real excited about that. I got there, and I really didn't know much about really at the time anything about any of the airplanes. And you think you do. Okay, but
right.
Until you get there, I mean, first time I walked around the A6, I started, doing like the Buddhist stuff, kind of bonding with the airplane. And I'm like, what the hell is this on the bottom of this airplane? And there's like 2 inches of armor plating on that. I said, where the hell are they sending me? Because I need this. Leaks didn't have it on his airplane. I know that. I'm like, what's with all this armor plating on the bottom? Well, I finally figured that out later. I was just a little learner. But yeah, some of the stuff we shot, we could shoot the Harms, and I got to shoot some Mavericks. That was really cool. Shrikes. For the old timers, I got to shoot the last Shrike down at Vieques for my squadron. That was really cool. And I remember where I was on the TR, I think this was 93 or 94. We were down in Vieques, and CAG wanted to do, he wanted to set some record for dropping the most bombs in, whatever time period. And we were just loading up 28 Merc 82s doing launching 4 shifts all day long and dropping them all the way to targets. And I remember wanting to be, dash 4 in that, so I could like we would pickle as soon as the last bomb came off the last airplane. So there'd be a train of what's the that's in public 28 times 4, bombs going in a train. I mean, and we did that all day long. That was so much fun.
Bombs, yeah.
112. We could even. For you pointing those guys out there, my airplane was pointing. It was just pointing at the wrong end. And,
right.
Yes. We called it the flying drumstick. Because when you're looking for the tanker, I see a drumstick across the circle. Let's go get it.
That's right. But we could actually carry some AIM-9s. We never really did. But if you look back in the history, back in right after the War of 1812, when this thing was built, we could carry 50 cal machine gun pods on our 2 outboard pylons. Do you guys know that?
Yeah.
I mean,
I
actually flew with guys who did that. I didn't do that. It's all, it's just like, point in the general direction and spray a lot of 50 cals and you hit something, right?
So some engineer at Pax River was like, hey, this is a good idea. Let's try this.
John Wayne's grandson.
Let's load something on it.
I actually do remember on our very last Tomcat cruise, we had a particular threat, and they were concerned about something or other, and so we actually did load some AIM-9s on the Prowlers. I don't remember what the story was, why. I just remember it was a kind of a strange thing. We're like, what? All right, go for it.
Yeah, well, we had the wiring to fire them. I'm sure the Prowler had the same wiring, I mean,
that's great. That's like handing a 350-7 to your 10-year-old.
But the thing about leaks of question, the eye patch, and you just can't make this stuff up. I know you guys will believe this, but the people listening, I don't know if they will or not. But I showed up the airplane. I'm like, what the heck are these curtains for here? You know, and you had these blast curtains here. I'm like, well, how the hell am I supposed to see where I'm going? He said, we'll talk about that later. This is Bobby Goodman. I don't know who Bobby Goodman is. You know,
Oh yeah,
he was the guy.
Yeah.
He was the guy that Jesse Jackson. He was shot down over in Lebanon. He was my first BN. I get a great story with him. But yeah, you had the blast curtains there, and they gave you an eye patch, and they had you all learned all this stuff in nuclear weapons school. And eye patch, it had you know, the thing you stuck in your leg, and it's just crazy, man. You know, they liked us to do that mission because we didn't have any electronics. I mean, the only who said they had a 108 computer, something like that? we had a 64, 64K attached to a 1900 Western Union typewriter, you know, with keys that went down like 2 inches every time. I mean, it was just amazing, the technology. But yeah, we had the blast screens and the eye patch and stuff. You know, they liked us to do that mission because the EMF wouldn't affect us like the Hornet babies.
So tell us about your greatest kill story. I think it was in the UK.
Go in the UK.
Unintended
Oh, that one?
casualties.
I do. Well,
Were you in World War II, UK?
I'm not sure if my old skipper knows about this story. I'm not sure he can still put me in hack or not. But for all you guys who are over in the Adriatic, you know about what is it? The Italian 1 and Italian 2 low levels. Remember that there was just north of Gaeta, the first the entry point for the Italian 1.
Yep.
Yeah, dusting out those cobwebs there. Well,
never got to do it, but I remember hearing about it.
Yeah. I mean, you know, so you check in with the Italian control. I love working with the Italian controllers, man. They are just so cool. I mean, they're just so laid back. You know, they're sitting there drinking some red wine, eating their pasta and meatballs while they're controlling you. You know, they say, it's okay, Heartless 536, we're checking in for point alpha of Italy Route 1. He said, Heartless 536, you know where you are, you know where you're going, you clear. All right, so.
What could go wrong?
Our country is your country. Go as low as you want.
You know where you are, you know you're going, you clear. So we're cleared. Well, right by Red Route, the Italian Route 1, there was a castle on top of this, you know, very steep and mountain there. And I said, hey, Weave, check that out. We're going down there. And I said, hey, let's go check out this castle. You know, well, you know, just a little bit off. It's not too far off the entry point. So I wanted to go check it out. And we checked it out, did a fly by the castle. I said, oh, wow, look at all those sheep. I said, holy shit, they just jumped. So, yeah, there was a whole bunch of mutton at the bottom of that cliff there.
Ow. Lemming.
Yes.
Sheep lemmings.
Yes. Yeah, so that was the only kill I got in Italy. Yes.
Ow.
Yeah.
I think that's Monte Cassino. As you come in there. Yeah.
It might be, yeah.
Hey, Leekster, I think it'd be a good idea. I know a lot of our listeners here will be pretty familiar with these aircraft, but it's probably worthwhile to have Roller and Ice talk a little bit about the difference between the Prowler and the Intruder and like how that came about.
Well, since I think Ice has got the most experience in both, why don't you take it, Ice?
Yeah, I think the idea started back in Vietnam with the surface to air threat being what it was. Recognized that we needed a dedicated electronic warfare capability to kind of tackle that surface to air and the air defense threat there. So the initial step was to develop an airplane called the A6A, which was essentially an A6 with a fairly basic electronic warfare capability. Had put the football up on the tail that you see on the Prowler. Essentially, that's where you put all the receivers to detect the signals out there, and a little bit of the guts inside, and split the responsibilities between the pilot and the BN to kind of generate some signals there. And that was kind of the initial step to kind of get us into that world, but recognize that the mission set was much more complex than that could be handled with two folks with the kind of the technology of the day. And that's what kind of led to the development of the A6B, which essentially take the A6, stretch it, goodness, I don't even know how long, what the difference is, like 17 feet, if I remember right. It's a pretty healthy
That
stretch.
much? Wow.
I think it may be 10 feet, but I'd have to pull out NATOPS and go check.
No worries.
Unless Roller knows the
considerable.
difference, I don't know.
Yeah, it's considerable.
It's like
We
one of those,
won't-
it's one of those classic NATOPS questions. How many pieces of wood are in the prower? I don't know. I actually don't know how long the prower is. But so that opened it up to put a pilot and we had ECMO 1 up front, and then in the back you had two folks dedicated to the electronic warfare mission, and he built a dedicated weapon system basically to deliver that electronic warfare capability, along with the ALQ-99 pods that actually delivered the energy. Put ram air turbines on the front of the daggum things as basically a battle isolation kind of methodology. So once you had the things up running, you had assignments going, those things were going to continue to deliver energy as long as you kept on driving around. So you didn't need any external or any energy from the airplane itself to actually drive those things. So in terms of dividing up the mission responsibilities, back in the day, the pilot was basically he was safety of flight, get us where we needed to get going, and oh, by the way, 17 seconds of glory when we came back home to make sure we get to Midrats. And then up in the front right there, ECMO 1 had all the navigation, communication kind of stuff, and then we also have a communication jammer that was his primary responsibility. And then the back, the dudes in the back were basically similar. Both crew seats in the back were the same. You generally have a senior guy and a junior guy there in the back managing the electronic warfare system, which could detect the signals. And then from there, you could basically make the assignments to take away enemy radar, whether it's early warning radars to blind their eyes, or you get in closer to the engagement radars, that type of thing. And then that's where you would primarily handle any of the engagement choices with harm missile if you carried that. But we didn't actually get harm missiles until quite a bit later on. I think 1986 is when we first started carrying. First got the certification to carry harm, and then obviously in Desert Storm that became a big part of the mission set there, like we've kind of already talked about, as we dealt with the significant threats there. And that was really kind of the watershed event for prowlers and for electronic warfare in general, was really taking a look at how we had to change the way we fight based upon the threat that was present there. And oh, by the way, based on the terrain, there wasn't a whole lot of terrain to deal with, so you pretty much had to go in there and battle those defenses head to head with something, and that something was generally electronic warfare, and proved to be very successful. So
that's very,
over the years,
that's a salient point, because I maybe you could mention a little bit about how the Air Force dealt with that. Not too about the same time, right? They were kind of moving in a different direction, and they ended up realizing that the Navy had a pretty good thing going with the Prowler, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, they really did. About that time, I think it was 1994 is kind of when they made that decision to retire the EF-111. It was a similar idea. It was almost like an EA-6A on steroids, based on the F-111 platform. It could fly like a daggum son of a gun in a straight line, but it took about 3 states to turn the daggum thing.
Yeah.
I got a chance to fly in one once. It was pretty sweet. I won't lie to you. That thing will freaking go. And unlike the A6, which had essentially a manual terrain clearance capability, working the pilot and the BN to get down low and fly. Now this daggum thing had an automatic capability where you could just dial up the number up at altitude, and no kidding, hands off, it would take you down there and right into a terrain follow mode, which was pretty daggum impressive. So
I have a friend of mine who did that actually before he transitioned to Strike Eagles, and they could dial in 100 feet at 1.3, and it just zoomed. It was amazing. But then again, it like you said, it wasn't as capable of a jammer. It just wasn't. It didn't have the system,
and it didn't have wasn't as effective, and it didn't have the ability to kind of tailor the mission sets. And I think that's really what set the Prowler apart, was partially the 4 guys and the ability to really take on much more complexity in mission execution, but also our ability to kind of tailor the mission load based upon what we were there to do. And I think that's why the Air Force made the decision to, kind of come over and, develop their expeditionary squadron. We built out 4, EA-6 expeditionary squadrons, to go fill that role for the Air Force. They paid some money up front. I think they got a lot more than they paid for, but it worked out great all the way around. and that really kind of paved the way for us to bring in the ICAP 3, which was the final version of the Prowler. Had much more of a multi-mode capability, so all three of the ECMOs could actually actively participate in all different parts of the mission. Brought in the MIDS capability, so now instead of just having to try and piece together what was going on based on what I was hearing, oh, by the way,
Right.
with
Right.
the ambient noise you're going to pick up anytime you're jamming low band. I mean, there's a whole bunch of freaking static going on just because of the nature of all the energy you're putting out. And so, maintaining any kind of SA in that environment was took a little bit of magic. So, but brought MIDS in. So at the end of the day, when we retired the Prowlers, it was a pretty daggum capable machine, but it was also kind of stretching the limits of that technology, and that's really what the Growler brought to bear for us. Was really kind of a huge step in technology, and really allowed both the pilot and the EWO to be equal partners in mission execution. Whereas even with ICAP 3, the pilot was still very limited in terms of what he could see, what he could do in terms of mission execution, other than just safety of flight and flying the jet, that kind of thing.
Bus driver.
Do you? I mean, my impression. I mean, this is a much larger conversation, but my impression is that the Air Force kind of put all their eggs in the stealth basket back in the '80s, and by the time the '90s came along with Desert Storm, a lot of folks realized that you really needed to have the jamming. And then, frankly, when we went into Bosnia and the F-117 got shot down, they were like, you know what? These guys are pretty invisible, but they're a lot more invisible if we have a couple jammers along with them. And the Air Force basically said, hey, we need some of those. So they borrowed a bunch of, I mean, they even sent Air Force guys through training in the Navy to fly in those Prowlers, and then they used them on the Air Force side, if I'm not mistaken.
I went through flight school with some of them.
And what about the theory of the Prowler being so mobile and always on deck? The carriers are always in all four corners of the world, where the Air Force has to explicitly deploy their F-111, their EF. Well,
they had already parked the EF-111s by then, if I'm not mistaken. So this was the only real true jamming asset that was available.
National asset, truly.
Yeah,
and
it's the one Navy airframe you see at Nellis all the time for red flag exercises. You always see the Prowler on the flight line. Yeah,
and when we were going through flight school, as at least Roller and I went through about the same time, we were told that the Prowler was the most expensive airplane on the flight deck, and they really picked, they handpicked some of the guys that left flight school with their wings. They were handpicked for the Prowler because of their landing grades as students, because they didn't want to put that expensive of an asset in the hands of somebody with low landing grades. At least that was the folklore that we were told at the time.
Well, Roller, that's how you got A6s.
Oh, the A6s guys were expendable. It was the EA6 that was.
Oh yeah. Oh, you could get a half a dozen A6s for one EA6.
Yeah, I think back in the day that the going rate for the Prowler was about 100 million, which was big money back in the day compared to the other airframes out there.
I remembered an opportunity once at Grumman Calverton when the Prowler was still in production. I had a friend, Mike Spencer, who headed the Prowler line, and he took me into the anechoic chamber, where the prototype Prowler, the white one with the Panther on it, with the red and black stripe, beautiful ship, was hanging from the ceiling on harnesses, on cables. The walls were lined with material, I want to say, because it was hair, it was a lot of different things.
Just EM absorbing material,
Yeah, and as a kid, you're just looking at, you have no idea, and you're like, well, why don't you tell, like the E2 has the dome set up on the range outside of Calverton. They test that right there. The Tomcats tested it, over the Atlantic. I'm like, why does the Prowler not get tested, in the air? And he looked at me, he goes, this has the electrical energy to shut down Connecticut. He goes, you can't turn this on outside. He's like, no way. He's like, this has to be turned on in here and tested. Besides Russian trawlers waiting out over the Atlantic to record any signals coming out of Grumman to see what they're testing and, record that data.
Well, that's always the wives' tale, right? If the Prowler off the East Coast, whenever everyone went full power, New York City would be black. It's the wives' tale, at least, right?
Yeah, it's a great wives' tale. I say we keep saying it, but
I don't think that's actually true.
Ice, what's your take on the Growler now? I mean, clearly it's a different level of capability, right? I mean, what are the pluses and minuses do you see out there?
Yeah, I think that the pluses are just the crew vehicle interface. It is really absolutely amazing. It changes. It's a huge leap in technology. So the difference between executing the mission when you're flying a Growler and executing the mission when you're flying a Prowler, it really is different. I mean, in the Growler, you've got so much information at your disposal. You're trying to find, the right display with the right information at the right time to do what you're trying to do. In the Prowler, you had a very limited set of information you were looking at, and you were trying to do a lot of deductions in your head. That there was a lot more accuracy and a lot more precision that we're able to bring to bear with the Growler. We had to do, and this is one of the things I participated in, was we had to do kind of the workload assessment. We had to convince ourselves and other people that with the crew vehicle interface that we were building, we could actually execute the mission with 2 folks in the jet as opposed to 4. So we put I probably had 100, 200 hours in the daggum simulator in St. Louis. We were just running different types of missions over and over again, and throwing different things at us to see how we handled it, to make sure that we could handle the workload in a dynamic environment with the 2 guys, and figure out the best way to share the roles between a pilot and the UO, as opposed to how we had done things in the past. And so a lot of that work that we did up front really paid out. And I didn't get to step right into flying the Growler. I was supposed to be the first RAG CO, but I got pulled into nuclear power instead. So I missed that opportunity. So it was actually a little while later I got to go back, and first time I got to fly the Growler, I got to fly with one of the guys that I'd flown with out in St. Louis, where we were doing some of this development work. And we went out and we flew a mission out in the Ole area out there in Whidbey.
Awesome.
And I was blown away. I was like, daggum, if we don't like this airplane, there is nobody to blame but ourselves, because they did exactly what we asked them to do in terms of building this airplane to execute the mission that we need to execute. So it's a great machine, and like I said, there's a lot of untapped potential just because of the tremendous capability and technology. So it's still got the feel of executing the mission. The mission still feels the same.
That's what it's all about.
Is it a lot for one guy to handle? I mean, in the back seat of that thing, I mean, that seems like a ton of information to process.
It is a lot, but
you've really got 1.5 ECMOs, right?
It is, yeah, because the pilot can actually participate in the electronic warfare mission now. Where in the Prowler, he just didn't have the ability to do that with any of the access to displays or information. So the sharing of the workload is quite a bit different than it was in the Prowler. But yeah, you can still do everything that you could do with the Prowler with the same or greater effectiveness, depending upon the systems that we're putting in place now. Next generation jammer and things of that nature are going to really fundamentally change the things that we can do out there, and the amount of impact you can have in the battle space with the jets.
More automation, I'm assuming, is coming with better technology.
A little bit, yeah, because it's getting more and more complex, where the human in the middle of that mess becomes the limiting factor pretty rapidly, just because things are so dynamic.
Yeah, I would think that it goes through the signals, and then it picks out the priorities and then sends them to you to deal with, and then it handles the low priorities itself, or it categorizes it to say. And it's great technology. It really is. I'm sorry, go ahead, Lester.
No, I just couldn't help but think of Wild Weasel guys and the CJ guys, because there's a whole nother,
4 clubbing the Gulf.
Clearly that would be more part of the Growler mission as well, from a tactical perspective.
Yeah, the Phantom Wild Weasel mission in the Gulf was quite an impressive mission for that aircraft and its age, and what they asked, and again the skill of the air crews involved make the airframe more capable than it kind of can be in some situations, and that's exactly one of them. So
before we transition to the strike stuff, did any of you guys have any? Lorenzo, do we want to add anything here, or did you guys want to throw out any more stories? I know Roller has
just
more
real
stories.
Quick. Yeah, I was going to say we really did get through the Prowler. Ice really was very thorough on it. We didn't get to the A6 though, as far as sorry, Roller. I mean, they did this to you, not me.
Hey, I'm good. Hey, I got a quick question for Ice. I was listening to you talking when you transitioned to the Growler. And after I left the A6, I Lutzer and I instructed for a while in T2s, and you have a different experience with your crew member sitting tandem. Now in the A6, we sat side by side, which is just an incredible experience, and you haven't lived it. It's really tough to really bottle up and sell it to somebody. It really is. But I've always wondered, what's your experience in that going from the same mission, but now you're not sitting next to your buddy who can high five when you get it right.
Yeah, there is. You definitely miss out on something by not having that side. Like I always told my young guys, spare the rod, spoil the pilot. When the boy needs to be hit, you hit him, right? Get his attention, and there's a lot of nonverbal communication that would go on, whether it was an A6 or a Prow or either one.
I'm just picturing Biff and the three moles in the back of that E2, and it's got to be like the Three Stooges slapping each other.
There was lots of hitting going on.
I'm curious about Paco shares a funny story about they're going into the break, and he tells the BN to look over and check the wing real quick, and so the BN looks over, and as they're going into the break, he unplugs the G-suit and then just pulls on the stick, and the BN just blacks right out, and he's drilling on himself, and Paco's laughing away. And could this be done in the backseat of the Prowler as well? I mean, does this trick go for both, front? And can you reach over in the back and just unplug him, and it's like, I'll see you in a few seconds?
If he's dumb enough to fall for that trick, he deserves whatever happens.
Absolutely.
That confirms it.
I will tell you,
so
it's not completely
us,
impossible to. Oh, sorry. I was going to say it's not completely impossible to
Nope.
whack the pilot 6 feet in front of you when necessary.
That's true.
It happens. So, Biff, what was the longest mission you flew in the E2? You guys did double cycles all the time. The rest of us are out there flying about 2-hour missions, and then in certain situations, maybe we'd fly like a 5 or 6 hour mission, like in Iraq or Afghanistan, but that was pretty rare. I mean, you guys did some long stuff,
we did
right?
lots of triple cycles.
Yeah.
A typical. Most of the regular flights were all 4.4.45s, and then I had but the E2 couldn't be refueled, so we basically had about a 6.0 was the max that you were going to get out of it, and that was on fumes. I did have one in Iraq or in Afghanistan. Actually, we did it a couple of times, but the first one was so it was Enduring Freedom in 2002. So it was kind of after the initial part of the hostilities, but the second part of it in 2002. And we were on Ike down the North Arabian Sea. We'd launch and fly over Pakistan and get up pretty close to Afghanistan, do a turn or two, and then come back to the ship. And that was basically a 5.5 hour mission just to do that. And we'd control all the way up and control all the way back. And then so we typically did 3 aircraft. So we'd launch one, send them up, and about an hour and a half later, launch another, and another hour and a half later, launch another. So we would, one gets to the tip, and then the other one can take that, and just kind of cycle through on the way up to Pakistan, through Pakistan and up into Afghanistan. And we were doing all close air support for the guys on the ground there, and control in and out. But and then the AWACS would come, so we'd cover about a 10-hour period, and the AWACS would cover a 14-hour period, basically. So one of the first nights we were there, the AWACS they would fly out of probably Oman, I think, or so, and they'd come across, but they went down, and stuff was going on, so we had to stay on. And so what we ended up doing was coming back a little bit and finding Jacobabad, which is just on the Afghan-Pakistan border. It was basically a forward air refueling point that the Army had set up. So we ended up coming at night, circle down, basically a PEL all the way down, land at Jacobabad. I jump out of the airplane. They're saying taxi up they're just saying taxi here, stop. So I get out of the airplane, go over in a foxhole, grab a fuel hose, come up, hook it up to the airplane. We refuel, leaving one of the engines still going. Finish up, run back, take the fuel hose back to the guy, give him a credit card. He runs the credit card off. Jump back into the airplane.
Sorry,
off.
this one's been rejected. Do you have another one?
We don't take American Express here. Do you have any?
and then we did another 4.5 hour mission. So we came back. It was a 9.9.
Wow,
that is insane. And that's the kind of stuff that blows my mind. Is that when you're stateside and you're doing training and all that, there's no way. I mean, nobody would want you doing something you're not trained to do, right? But you're out there and it's real world stuff, and it's like, hey, I don't know how the fuel. I mean, the guys would come up to you. I work for the airlines now, and I was a fueler. I actually fueled airplanes for years before I was an airline pilot, before I was a military pilot. And guys will go, how do we fuel a 777? I mean, I have no idea, man. You plug that thing in the thing up there and turn it on. I don't know. I mean, and there you are. You're flying in the middle of nowhere. There's no approach. There's probably mountains in that country.
Yeah,
if it ends with a
lava
bob or a whatever stand, it's got mountains.
We went in like a week after that, and during the daytime, and did it. And as you were coming in and looking down, it was just the little town area. It was biblical, because it was mud huts with straw roofs. You could look into the houses. There was a little stream that was muddy. There were cows all in the stream and people bathing. And I mean, it was something straight out of 2000 BC.
Wow.
That was it was pretty interesting. But
now, of course,
now you got the E2D's got the IFR capability on it, and a couple squadrons have that, and they're doing it right now.
It's refueling now.
Unbelievable. I saw that this year, and every E2 guy I know let out a groan simultaneously. They were all like, you gotta be kidding me. Like, we already don't fly long enough missions.
So now what they're going to, so last year, E2 conference, and kind of got an idea of what was going on. So they've got the MQ-25 Reaper that's going to be part of the Air Wing. They're actually going to be part of the Hawkeye Squadron. They're going to take them in.
Really?
And then that's going to be so the E2 is going to control the tanking overhead, and then that's going to be the main tanker for the Hawkeye is the MQ-25.
Wow,
that's
what a
amazing.
different world. Well, shall we consider our strike package?
Just real quick, I want to dive on Biff for a second here. Something in his notes on his resume. Biff, you were in the Pentagon for 9/11. You want to talk about that? That's actually an interesting one.
So I was on the OpNav staff, and I was actually in the Surface Warfare Directorate, and I was in charge of requirements for the Advanced Hawkeye, which is now the E2D, as well as CEC, Cooperative Engagement Capability, and what was the SM-6 missile. So we were trying to be able to shoot a missile from an Aegis and be able to control it with an E2 link into an active basket to shoot down a missile 250, 300 miles away. So that was the project I was working on, and I ended up being in the Pentagon, getting ready to go brief the JCS on. It was a JATAMDO brief into the tank that day, and so my office had been in the Pentagon, and we got moved down to Crystal City, but I was doing the brief there, and it was like an 8 o'clock brief, and so we were in there about 8:30. A couple guys walked in and said, "Hey, sorry to disturb you, but we just want to let you know, two airplanes just ran into the World Trade Center." I'm like, holy crap! And then about 7 minutes later, boom, and so I was on in the fourth corridor, C ring, fourth floor. So that was a corridor that had just been redone. So that's where surface warfare was, and air warfare up on they were on the fifth floor. And actually I was doing a lot of stuff with N89, who's a special projects, and they were on the E-ring, and that's where I was heading, out after this meeting. But basically, once it hit, we're like, that was an airplane. They just hit us. So we exited the room. People were getting out and went down the stairwell. There was lots of crumbling concrete and stuff in the stairwell. And as I would piece together, afterwards, basically the cockpit ended up into the C ring. So it landed about 2 floors underneath me of where we were. But
Wow.
1 year later, I was XO of the Tiger Tails, and we were doing strikes in Afghanistan on September 11th,
In response.
2002.
Yeah.
So
Wow. Awesome.
one year later, it was great that way. But yeah, I lost a few friends that day, and I got the pin, says I was there, just like Tailhook 91.
Amazing, but the pride to it is that you went and responded to that. That's what America's all about. We don't stand for that, and you can try to harm our people, but our people are prepared to get in the machines made by our people. It's an amazing story.
20 years this year, March 20 years. It's amazing. It's been that long.
Amazing story. Survivor, like you said. But yeah, so Siphon, Leakster, we have a mission.
Fabulous.
We have an enemy terrorist camp 600 miles north of the boat, and we're about 300 miles off the coast, so we don't need a tanker. So that's one less airframe for Brian to maintain. I'll let you know, Brian. It's a KA-6D, just in case you were wondering what you'd be maintaining.
Okay, got it.
So yeah, let's put the strike package together, and let's go take out a simple target and understand collectively how they all work together. And Ken's joining us right now, and he's a VF-14 maintainer, one of our co-hosts. Good evening, sir.
Hey, what's going on? How are you?
Good. Yeah, we're about to launch the mission here and get everybody underway. And we have Biff from the E2, and we have Ice from the Prowler. We have Roller from the A6, and of course, your 2 compadres, Leakster and Siphon, in the Tomcat. And we're going to send the boys up north. We talked a little bit about what each airframe does and their experiences with them, and now we're going to send them to work, and we're going to shoot them off the deck and take care of business in response to Biff's 9/11. This is,
yes.
Well, we're pretty lucky today because, both these guys have a ton of experience in training people to do this kind of thing, and they've done it in the real world a lot too. So to me, I have far less experience than them, but my impression as a young fighter pilot was that the amount of work that the attack guys did, and when they put the teams together, people think that it's kind of like the movies where you just we're gonna go get some bad guys. They don't realize the amount of planning that goes into something like this. And you were at the strike school, right, Ice? Tell us about how you would approach something like this from the beginning.
Well, I think that the general context of any strike mission of the package would come down in the air tasking order, which is basically a 3-day cycle of the upcoming missions. All that ties into the bigger picture strategy from the component commander, and that's how we would get our tasking on a daily basis. So, taking that initial tasking, that'll let you know what the target is, where it is, which aim points you need to hit, and then from there, you have to kind of build out your mission with the different assets you've been granted and that type of thing. And if you need to do some coordination, assuming we're on the ship, you may have to coordinate with external assets off the ship. Generally speaking, you've probably got about 8 hours in terms to, put all that plan together from the time you get notification till the time you've got things pretty well in the can. Gives you a chance to get some sleep, hit some rack time, and then, before you execute the strike the following day, you plan on briefing that to the whole strike package about 3 hours prior to launch. Generally, with a big package like that, you generally push the brief back, from what it normally brief 2 hours prior to launch. But with a big package like that, we'd probably push it back about 3 hours. So, within that 8 hour planning window, the first thing we try to do is we try and get the up to information on the threats. Then our attack buddies will be taking a look at the actual aim points, taking a look at the weaponeering. We may have had some weaponeering dictated to us coming down in the ATO, but we also may have some flexibility and executing weaponeering to make sure we get the desired effects on those aim points. And then from the looking at the air defenses or the fighter defenses, whatever we're going to have to go up against, that's where you really start building out that plan, working with the E2 folks, the Prowler folks, and the rest of the fighters and the strike fighters to figure out, okay, how are we going to suppress the threat so we can get the attack element in there, hit those dimpies, get them back out against safety, and that kind of builds the overall framework for what you're going to try and execute, and then you just keep working down to get that detail. And once you get the details, then you just make sure you've got everything synchronized. Sit folks down for a couple of murder boards to run through it, make sure all the pieces mesh. That's always the hardest part, because you're gonna have different elements doing different things. As a strike lead, you've got to maintain that big picture, and you got to set some checkpoints where you bring those elements back in together and make sure that the different parts and pieces actually come together. And then towards the end of that 8-hour planning window, what we'd always do is we'd bring everybody together for essentially one final murder board, and we'd run through that brief one more time with the core folks on the team, just to make sure, all right, this all makes sense, and we're ready to go for the brief.
You got a representative from each portion of each community there, because they're owning each piece of that puzzle. So I know we got a lot of people who probably are familiar with what the ATO is, but there are probably some who don't know what the ATO is. ATO is the Air Tasking Order, and it's that document that's put out every day by the commander of the Air Forces in that area. So in some cases, like what was at the beginning of Afghanistan, we were actually writing the ATO on the Roosevelt and pushing that out to the rest of the air component. In most cases, if it's something where we've got an established command, that's the Air Force is sending that out, and we're getting that every day, and we're going to parse that out for the missions that we're going to actually execute. But I just want to make sure everyone understood what the ATO was.
Gotcha.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that is a big deal. In Desert Storm, we had 6 aircraft carriers out there, and the ATO was being written on the beach, and they were flying out the ATO to the different ships. And we didn't have the level of communication that we have nowadays. And many times the ready room, the individual squadrons wouldn't know what their plan was going to be for the next day until midnight or 1 or 2 in the morning, and then you're trying to put the pieces together to make those missions happen. So it was a challenge. I think you guys were lucky. If you were writing your ATO on the ship, then you're right there.
It definitely evolved. I mean, from 91 to 2005 and beyond, it's evolved.
A lot of lessons learned is why it evolved, right?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
And that's why we were talking about
They kind of succumbed to the Air Force.
Right. Well, they're pretty organized. They had it sorted out. So I'm glad that they picked one or the other. Nobody cares how they do it as long as we're all on the same page. And during Desert Storm,
they don't have an airplane cartoon, though.
No.
Right.
Thank you very much. Live for the airplane cartoon.
The murder board to me is a big deal, and it's a big part of our culture that I don't think people understand that are outside of the culture, is that we're really big on briefing the plan to each other and not taking it personally if people criticize the plan. And that is what the murder board is all about. Hey, there's one guy running he's the strike lead, but he's not necessarily an A6 guy or an F-18 guy, or who knows what they are. So you're listening to each subject matter expert from each platform tell you what's the best way to execute the mission, and you try to come up with a coordinated mission, and then you brief it, and you brief it to higher and higher ups. And I was going to ask you, Ice, when you're briefing those kind of missions I imagine you have to brief them to the Admiral, right? At some point on a one-off mission like this, you would definitely be in front of the Admiral, right? Telling him what your plan
for
is.
a one-off, for more of a campaign style thing, I found myself in the position as the actually CAG Strike Ops of all things of kind of managing the master air attack plan for the air wing and the strike group, and I was knucklehead who was coordinating with the folks back in the JFAC, and I was the knucklehead that was keeping the Admiral up to date with what the big picture plan was and where we were going to fit into the big picture, individual packages and those types of things. In my case, anyway, the Admiral didn't want all that. He trusted that we knew what we were doing. He just wanted to make sure he understood the big picture, what we were going to do, what the priorities were, and how.
And there
all
were
that
other
fit
admirals
together.
that wanted personal briefs on
There are,
every
yeah.
strike.
Yeah.
And it's funny. It's one of those things where I may have been in that circumstance. I may have been very lucky. I had a very smart surface warfare officer as the strike group commander, and he didn't. It wasn't his thing. But yes, other folks that had very strong personality aviators as strike group commanders, they had a little bit of a different experience.
Mm-hmm.
So
There's another one that was a very smart surface warfare that really wanted everything.
Yeah.
Every
Yeah,
detail.
this one, yeah,
Later
probably know what
later
you're talking
became
about.
later became a politician in the state of
See,
Pennsylvania.
you just
for a while.
validated my thought process. I knew exactly what you were talking about. He was our Desron commander when I had a very smart surface warfare officer as a strike commander, who went on to be the
Interesting.
chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
So when this is going on, at this point, at what point do you get with the individual squadrons, especially with the weaponeering? The maintenance guys have to know what hard points to put on the airplanes and that kind of stuff. I mean, that has to be set pretty early on because that takes some time. When do you see that kind of stuff happening, Biff? Or what point are they talking to is this 5 hours before the mission, 4 hours before the mission?
Well, so I stuck it through it pretty good, but there are different elements. So the strike part of the element is getting together and doing their plan. Usually, if there is an air threat, the fighter, strictly fighter group, and the E2 will go off and look at that, kind of see which is the right way to go in. And then you've got the prowlers planning their harm table. So you've got really 3 different groups together, and then it's all got to come back together and make sure the timing's right. You pick a TOT, pick a time to go, and then make sure that all of those timings are set. And then, like I said, you would brief that as a mass brief on the carrier probably 3 hours prior to launch, and then everybody go into their individual section briefs and then individual aircraft briefs, and then go. Then the Hawkeye would be the first one off the deck because we're slow and we got to get out there. So so we would probably launch 45 minutes before everybody else just to get out there and take a look,
Get on station
and get
Tell us
on
what's
station and ready to go.
I was going to say one of the things I did before flight school, actually, I worked kind of with what ICE was doing when he was a younger officer. I actually worked in the strike ops office on the carrier, on the Roosevelt. And so that planning process, the integration between the air wing and the ship's company guys was real tight. And so we always had, like you said there, we're kind of working on about a 1 day out plan. Occasionally, if necessary, we could have the flexibility built in to do something faster. But even then, we still kind of had to know what's coming and be able to plan for it. So generally, the CAG gunner was in that plan. That's the CAG ordnance officer. And then the ship's gunner, the guy who actually provided those weapons and made sure they were built up properly, was all in that process. And so at some point in there, the squadrons, the maintenance guys are getting the idea, okay, we got to prepare for X that's coming up. But this is a quote I'm going to butcher, so I hope someone can tell me better than I can. But basically, it's that amateurs talk tactics, but professionals talk admin, and it's this admin preparation that it sounds boring and it's really unglamorous, but it's the admin preparation prior to anyone even taking a cat shot that really gets the strike package ready to go.
Yeah, the key part on the ordnance side is obviously the load plan. We got 2 key documents that kind of drive operations on the carrier. The air plan, that's how you're going to sequence all the airplanes off and on throughout the course of the day. And then in parallel with that is the load plan, which tells you how you're going to load out all those weapons. So generally that needs to be done. The ordnance folks need to know in the afternoon prior to the next day nominally, so they can start building out the the weapons downstairs, get them upstairs pre-staged. The maintainers know what they're planning on loading, so they can start mapping out that plan. And it's all the way down to fuse settings and everything else. So it's shoot chaff and flares. I mean, every little detail of what you're going to put on the airplanes has got to be on that load plan. So from a planning timeline perspective, that's one of those first things you got to start ironing out. You got to figure out what the weapon is, make sure it matches up, and you got to get that on the load plan so that daisy chain of events can start, because that's got to start well before you start briefing the flight, getting ready to walk, all that kind of thing. That's hours and hours before that.
Mm.
So the thing that always seems to go sideways on the training missions, which I have rarely seen problems with operationally, is the comm plan. And, Roller is like, oh, yeah, we went into Italy and, you know where you're going and you know what you're going to do. Go ahead, But the truth is, I can remember being in Italy and going up whatever frequency and there's nobody there.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that Biff, certainly being in the E2, where you're like kind of the comm center of this whole thing, you guys must have struggled with comm plans over the years too, right? And you're way out in front of that.
I mean, we would try to build it in that, typically every element wants their own chit chat channel. So you got to basically have a strike common, and which everybody's on, and each airplane typically only had two radios. So you got to have a strike common and then something else. And so we had 5 or 6 radios in the Hawkeye, so we would monitor every one of those. So you were on strike common, and if you're saying something and nobody's doing it, then you could dial up another radio and talk to a specific guy. Hey, listen, you're missing this, and then they go, oh, okay, and coming back. So we would always be able to dial up somebody's back radio and get them back in the game if they were off, and as well as trying to find someone. So someone, you'd have a comm plan of rolling main comms getting into an area. So a lot of times we would do that for the strike package itself. So we would, as the Hawkeye, we'd check in the whole group and be able to get them into the area before and then of course everyone's on the strike comment after that. So so that is the basic admin part of getting into somebody's country. And getting out
when they
of
don't want
somebody's
you
country.
When people don't realize how difficult
sometimes you have
that
to go
is.
through somebody's country to get to somebody else's country.
Right. I remember going through Italy, and I'm on the wing, and my CO is the Rio in the back seat of the lead F-14, and me and my Nugget Rio are flying along next to him, and we're trying to go through Italy, and he's calling them, repeatedly, and the guy's talking in Italian, but he's not answering our calls. Clearly, he's monitoring 2 radios, and he's got the one that we're talking on turned down, and he's transmitting on both, right? And it's obvious to us, the 2 guys in my jet, me and my Rio, but it's not obvious to my CO. And we had this running joke where if you do a Italian accent, they'll understand you better. So the CO starts calling. Yeah, Brindisi, a Diamondback, a 102. We want to come fly, and and at the same time, coincidentally, my Rio had switched over to the other backup freak and got the Italians on and called and said, "Hey, Diamondback 102, how do you read?" And right after my CO goes, Brindisi, we want to fly, they answered on both frequencies. So they come back, "Oh yeah, we hear you. You can come fly," So he thinks that he's talking to them.
It worked.
So,
Broke the code.
so he starts with this Italian. Okay, we're gonna drop some bombs on your island here. It was comical.
I think we just offended about 50 million Americans, but that's okay.
Well, we can cut it out, but we had to finally come back over on the frequency and tell them you're on the wrong freak. Sorry.
Right. Classic.
As part of a comp plan, Afghanistan is a perfect example. There's troops in contact. There's things going on, but as a Hawkeye, you're looking at it. That's going on one part of your scope, and then on another part, there's airline traffic going back and forth. Just
How bizarre.
regular stuff going on during the day. So you're watching that and you're watching this. And so, yes, there's comms going on of just regular check-in with ATC and other things going on with flight, Air Emirates checking in and we're, the Hawkeye's doing that. While in the back end, you're doing a strike where, people are getting shot at. So that there is real world stuff going on with real world stuff in different dimensions. So it's kind of interesting.
Amazing. And you're right in the middle of the big picture.
Yeah, situational awareness is everything. Hey, I'm just real curious here before we go and shoot the Prowler off the deck in the A6 and the Tomcat. Maybe Ice wants to answer this. From what I understand, having the Tomcat on your wing when you're sneaking into a country isn't called sneaking into a country. It's basically bringing a drum set with you. And while you're headed north, you really want to tell him to go south, but, the mission calls for him on the wing. Having that big radar lit. What's the scenario behind that? Would you nose cold the F-14 and data link it to the E2 to keep your threat levels low for yourself? Or would you let that F-14 just run hot? And
I think if it's a high threat scenario, you're just going to turn it on and go. Good Lord, you don't want that dude running around blind. But we did have scenarios where we would do things that were probably a little sneakier than that. That worked out pretty well. We had the ability to sneak up on folks if we needed to, and we use that more with the folks coming out long range trying to find us, and we'd get tip where they were coming, and
tactics.
They think it was one thing, and guess what? Shows up, it's another. So
well, in the Hawkeye we had Link 4 with the Tomcats and Hornets, so you could basically the E2 could provide radar hits of something ahead of, and then it would show up on the Tomcat radar as a symbol. So they could go without it on for a while.
And of course, later on, even better with the JTIDs.
With JTIDs is much better. Yeah,
exactly.
We practiced that.
Yeah.
It was good stuff. I mean, I didn't like flying around with my radar in mute. I mean, I'm a radar intercept officer. I need a radar. But yeah, occasionally we would practice, and it was good to be able to just point the radar at whatever threat you guys were giving us immediately, and bam, there it is. It was beautiful. It was nice to have that info. So yeah.
I was an F-14A, so we didn't have a radar half the time anyway, so it didn't really matter.
So Biff,
we're on pulse only today. We got about 20 miles. Awesome.
So Biff, one more question. One more question for you, Biff. If Leakster's having a problem comprehending, turn heading 280 and make your airspeed 400, knots, and Siphon's in the back going, I don't understand. I'm completely confused. A lot of people don't realize
ever.
A lot of people don't realize that the flip of a few switches through data link, you can actually take control of that F-14 and you can guide it towards where it needs to be in the sky to help our incapacitated crew at the moment, find their target. Can you share a little bit of that?
We did practice that.
Because I understand F-14 air crews weren't too happy about that.
It didn't really happen unless they wanted to, and it was something you practice. But and a lot of it, again, some of that was built for Cold War and MCON, and trying to get into an area without being seen. So when you're doing strikes against somebody that's not quite as smart or as that you really don't care if you're seen, you're coming in big and strong, like you're not trying to be sneaky.
Roger.
You just come in loud and proud and say, try to get me if you can.
I was going to ask Lorenzo, if you don't mind, I was going to ask our maintainer guys here, as we're getting ready towards launching off, as we're getting closer to the go time, when do they first to get the inkling of what's coming down here? What it's something other than just a normal cyclic op kind of thing going on. What's the first notification that you guys are hearing of that?
I've never experienced, actual warfare, I guess, really. So for us, it was just the plan of the day. We had a flight plan, and that's what we knew these birds were going at this time, make sure they're serviced and ready to go.
I mean, I suppose that's kind of the beauty of it. You guys are just in the cycle. You have a normal mode of operation that it almost kind of doesn't matter what the jet is going to do. You're at a high level of professionalism anyway to make it happen.
Right. It basically needs hydraulics, nitrogen, as far as airframes goes, make sure there's fluid and everything's going to work right. And that happens every time the plane goes. So Orties are a different story. They're going to have the load plan, and they're going to be the ones swapping out different, mounting points and everything else. And then, the mechs would put drop tanks on, but for most, at least for the Tomcat, it pretty much had drop tanks on no matter what.
A quick question for you, as a maintainer's point of view. When you prep the jet, say it's getting a mission, it's going to have a 0700 launch in the morning, you obviously have a time against you now to get your aspect, your end of it done. Do you work together simultaneously with the Orties while they're doing their work, prepping the jet with rails, changing racks, or do you perform your service and then you turn the jet over to them? They perform their service and then the air crew. How does that work?
It was pretty much like everybody's on the jet at the same time.
Okay.
You had the AEs doing their thing. You had the ATs doing theirs. Airframes was doing something else. The ADs were doing something. The Orties, it just looked like a whole bunch of ants crawling over the plane at one time.
Okay. And this is on obviously multiple airframes because we're talking just Tomcat, but the same thing's happening for the Hawkeye, for the Prowler, for the Intruder, for all respected maintainers for each airframe are all diligently working to meet that 0700 launch.
Yeah, I would imagine so. I mean, I can't speak for the 18 guys or the Prowler guys or anything, but I know with the Tomcats, you might at some point you might have 20, 30 guys working on the jet at the same time.
Biff and Ice, you guys were either of you maintenance officer at one point?
Yeah, I did maintenance my department head tour.
Mm-hmm.
Maintenance and ops. So
Yeah, same here. Yeah, it was. I was actually maintenance officer in our 2001 cruise right after 9/11. So that was a good time to be the Mo. We were busy.
Mm-hmm. It's a maintenance control. They've got that. For those of uneducated, maintenance control is the kind of the operations section of maintenance, if you want to look at it that way. They're the ones who are managing what Brian and Ken and all the guys are doing. And which shop has kind of ownership of the aircraft at any given time for whatever problems they're fixing and making sure the jet's good to go, or the non-jet Biff. But were there challenges for that kind of situation where you had to look at a particular aircraft and say this is the one we thought was going to go and we're not going to be able to make it happen?
Well, I'd say for major missions we always had a backup, and there was. You usually try to write Hawkeyes typically had 4 airplanes. Later on, it had 5 airplanes per squadron, but usually one was a hangar queen. So you had 3 on deck. So you'd try to write a 2 airplane schedule. But sometimes if you needed to, if the strike called for launch in 2, you had 3 ready, and there are many times where you man up one airplane and the other one was already turned up, ready to go. And if it went down, crew jumped out of that one and went over and jumped into the other one and tried to make the launch or launched at the end of the cycle if we couldn't make it. But there was lots of days in the Gulf, 140 degrees on the flight deck where you're in one airplane, pre-flight it in there. Now you got the cooling going up and it's all good. And then the thing shuts down and you got to run out of that one, run over to the other airplane and then jump in there. And it's many times I did, jumped out of one and into another to make a mission.
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges, particularly when you get into a sustained operation where you're operating at a real strong pace, is you got to manage all the daggum inspections on all the daggum airplanes. You got phase inspections coming up. You got 714, 2856 on down the line, day inspections. So trying to not just keeping the jets up to work, but also you still got to do the standard preventive maintenance stuff to make sure you're in good shape for the long haul. And that's really, from a planning factor, Yeah, and what you're managing within the maintenance department and maintenance control. That's probably even a bigger challenge than what you see day in and day out in the daily flight schedule and meeting those demands. That really adds a wrinkle to the whole thing.
Yeah, just to let everybody know, Roller's sitting there quietly right now. He's stalking everyone because he's thinking, I can carry 18 500-pounders on the wing. Don't these guys even have any concept of this?
That was each wing.
Each wing.
No, yeah, it's all good stuff. I remember being more kind of more down in the details. I remember when we get the tasking order, we would start with this timeline, and we'd have what I looked at the time as the longest whiteboard ever made. And you start like, here we are today, and this is where we trap back at the carrier. And you planned every single minute, and that all we had individual murder boards in there as well. And then, I remember I remember you guys talking a little about, what type of weaponeering, and right down to the fuse. I think you said that I said about what type of fuses or whatever we would use, And I remember getting in, rolling my sleeves up on that with my team that I was with. And we look at stuff, it's like, what kind of target are we going at? Is it a hardened target? What kind of type of penetration do you need? Are there any standoff weapons? What's the EW range? Is there, do we need some standoff weapons? Probably, from the prowler shooting some harms, or maybe some A6. I remember doing some missions with some prowlers. That was a lot of fun. Doing that. I always tried to stay behind your wing line because I didn't want to have a couple of boys, and I succeeded because I had 2 boys. So, but I always made sure to stay behind your wing line. But I remember, having some harms, and the prowler having some harms, and doing your thing out there that you did is a lot of fun. But getting down to the actual, I remember somebody asked about how long, did you give the ordies to start fusing up? I think it was like 36, 48 hours they needed to have, because a lot of times these things would change as well. I mean, when was the last time you had a target that was stagnant? Did you ever have a stagnant target that was like, okay, it's going to be here at this time, it's going to have this threat, and
opening night, maybe
it was constantly changing, right? So I remember changing fuses maybe 3 times. From mechanical to electronic fuel, maybe a combination of a electrical and mechanical fuse, and then, you'd, then we had to bring some standoff weaponeering involved in it as well. And none of this was in a silo. I remember my squadron, we really stressed, okay, if you're in the second strike group and you're, -2, you still need to know what everybody else's mission is, because you never know what's going to happen on the aircraft carrier. Never going to know what's going to happen on the launch. I remember my skipper was leading, it was several dozen multinational strike into Basra, and I was -2. And as we hit our IP inbound, he says, "Roller, you got the lead. Radar's Tango uniform." Right, so I take the lead, right? And what happens as soon as you take the lead? You get lit up. And I had the harm. All right. So, and and I remember at the harm, I don't know if the prowler was like, I'm sure it was, remember the hammer that came down to give you 10 seconds to, you squeeze the trigger and you had 10 seconds, well, that thing, there must've been a really good operator there, because it got to 8 seconds. I remember this. I'll never forget this. It got to 8 seconds, and we were supposed to shoot it, right? The ROE that was there at the time, So, I had never shot that harm that night, but you just had to know everybody's mission. You know what I mean? It just wasn't, you weren't isolated. You weren't being a good wingman if you were just focusing on what you had to do. You guys have the same type of experience? Something similar,
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, man.
Well, I was going to say there were plenty of times. This was not so much of a strike, but just a regular ATO mission into Iraq, when you were sitting super spare for the wing, which means that there were a couple Hornets going, a couple Super Hornets going, and a couple Tomcats going, and any one of those 6 goes down, you got to fill in for that mission. You got to go join up on the other guy and be his wingman. And that meant you were pretty familiar with which each of those individual missions were. Certainly in a strike, in a larger strike, the issue is a little more complicated though, because there are a lot more moving parts. You couldn't, if your mission was high value asset cap, which is basically like Lorenzo was saying, sit on the prowler's wing and go take the commit if you needed to on something that's going after the high value asset. You couldn't suddenly fill forward to the MiG sweep or something like that, because you had a higher priority mission there. But certainly the SA, the situational awareness to know what else everyone else in the strike is doing was very important.
Oh yeah. I just remember that was something that we really drilled, really pressed hard on the JOs to learn. You had to know everybody in your strike group. It's like on your platform I'm talking about. Because we had a couple A6 squadrons. So we you might be flying with VA-65. And I was in VA-36. You might be flying with VA-65. If one of their planes goes down or something, and you were one of the alerts. Like you were talking. So you had to know everything. And that timeline, I took that tool that the Navy taught me and used that in just about everything that I've done in my life. Where you're talking about, what did you say? It was admin are the professionals and tactics are what? What'd you say?
The amateurs.
Amateur. Okay. Yeah. Well, and that's what I did. That's the planning that I try and use, I don't use a long whiteboard anymore. Okay. But that's, that was probably one of the best tools the Navy ever taught me, is how to do that high level, so detailed planning. It was amazing.
I think that's what ICE is doing this day for a living, right? That's kind of what you're teaching now. Is that correct, sir?
A little bit. Yeah. I mean, we're focused on, human and organizational performance, which was really, how to synchronize the efforts of folks on, any team in a complex operating environment to achieve, as much success as humanly possible. And it really is, it's about, you kind of turning the process a little bit on its head to make sure that you're getting the most out of every team, which is really what we did, like you talked about, through that murder board process. You give everybody that voice, and whether the junior guy or the senior guy in the room, you got that voice. Say, wait a minute, that doesn't look right, and really drawing that out of folks. That's something I think we always did very well in naval aviation, and we're finding that really applies in a lot of different environments, in a lot of different industries, in a lot of different places. So.
I think you're empowering your people. That's just really something that was great at that time.
Well, sidelining the ego and being able to take criticism too in a planning process before the execution is really important, because that'll keep you alive. So,
that.
the E2's off, and then what I don't even know, ICE. What order would you launch these guys, or Biff? You guys have written these airplanes before. Who's going up next? The tankers?
You'd probably get you get the tankers up in the air, get them going. Then you just kind of flow in. You get the prowlers going pretty early once you get some fighters up in the air, and then finish out with probably the attack guys towards the end, and then and just kind of roll it from there. I mean, getting E2s up and off the deck is the most important part of the whole program. That the handler will have an aneurysm if you don't get that going early.
Well, that's just the deck management. That's it. Yeah.
It is. Yeah. It's just so much space. So that's, like I said, we talked a little bit about their in-flight refueling. I feel bad for those guys because the handler's never going to want them to come back. It's going to be. No. Let us know when you need the oil and you can come back.
So basically, you're going to stay airborne for the entire flight, 14 hours.
Yeah, pretty much.
Just off the deck, easy.
The entire deployment, 6 months.
But see, as a pilot, that's exactly what goes through my head. What you said, ICE, was that the limiting factor is the engine oil, right? You're like, gosh darn it, we're going to be out here till we run out of oil, basically, because it's never going to let us land.
And so, go ahead.
So Lorenzo mentioned that the target was 600 miles north, and he said, so gas isn't going to be a problem. But the first thing that went into my head is that sounds like gas is going to be a problem. 600 miles sounds like a short mission, but it's really, fuel is definitely always a player when it comes to delivering weapons, especially these days. Well, with the Legacy Hornet now, with the E's and F's, it's not as big of a deal. I don't know.
It's not. It's not. But I mean, certainly, even in a Tomcat, I'd still want to plant some gas. I want to top off immediately as soon as we get up to altitude, basically.
You don't want to go over the line with your master arm on without some sort of combat fuel, basically. Maneuvering fuel, if you will. If you're going to get into a SAM duel and somebody starts popping a couple SAMs on you, you're going to burn your gas up pretty quickly, in my opinion.
Well, you need some gas on the backside, dude. Just to.
You may remember the number, leaks are better than I do, but I recall if we were in max AB in the 110s, in the Bs and Ds, we could actually completely drain in 15 minutes. Is what I recall. That's the number I recall. Is that something
it was 10 in the A because it was 2,000 pounds a minute. And we held 20,000 pounds. So, when we would tank, we would go over the line into Iraq with usually around the 18. Because you're never going to be full, right? So you're like 17 somewhere in there. You had a minimum amount of fuel that you would enter into bad guy country with. So
so that would go in the strike planning too, Leakster, because we would go depending on what the 600 miles away. A6s we could carry 26,000 pounds of something. Okay, it could be gas, it could be bombs, or it could be a combination of it. So we might load out, instead of, I don't know, 12 Mark 83s, maybe we only do 6 Mark 83s, on 2 pylons, three on 2 pylons. We put a buddy store in the center tank, and then we'd be fuel, and maybe we put two drops on the other stations for our 5 station fill. And then, we would top the fighters off right after launch, drop our bombs, and then top them off or fill them up or, on the way back. 600 miles isn't a long ways for these.
Not at all. I thought it was the most capable bomber. I was absolutely blown away what it did when I flew with them.
Yeah, so that's one of the things I saw quite a bit out there is, multi-mission. We tank everybody, drop our bombs, and then tank everybody on the way back.
That's amazing.
So once we've kind of assessed basically our threat, we got the question of, is this something where we need to do a MiG sweep kind of thing? Do we need to do an OCA mission first? Or are we simply just going to do the reactive kind of air-to-air?
Well, I mean, most strikes you would put, I and Biff can speak better to this than I can, but, most you would just put what in the old days they'd call a bar cap, or, you just put some fighters out on either side of the strike package out in front, and they would, then it's funny because, like I said, we always called Top Gun air-to-air fantasy camp, because the reality is that the air-to-air threat in most of these environments is not really there, so that's why the F-14 got in the bomb dropping business, because there was no business. How many
mission wise, you kind of, but yeah, you had as far as an OCA mission, you had a MiG sweep just to go in and clean things out. Did bar caps, and then there were tar caps that were the target cap that went with a strike package. It could be attached or detached, and then any HVA cap. So there was several different missions, but again, depending on the threat and depending on the air-to-air threat or the surface-to-air threat is what you planned for each of the different fighter and or strike assets that you had there. So obviously at Fallon, there were lots of MiG sweeps for different things. And then when you got to Desert Shield, there were some. And then when you got to Afghanistan, there's none. So it depends on the threat and what's out there.
Absolutely,
we did as a Navy. Actually, did in Desert Shield had a strike package that had 2 aircraft that were shot down 2. Then that was the strike package that shot them down, controlled by the Hawkeye. I think it was the V8 125. 2 pop-up threats neutralized by the strike package, and then continue to go in and drop their bombs.
Nick Fox and Nick Mongillo and The other guy's name was Fox. I forgot his name.
Mark
It was Mark Fox.
Mark Fox.
Yeah.
Admiral. Yeah. Or three-star.
Right.
That too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so far as the timeline would go, I remember the A6s really wouldn't we wouldn't really commit to go feet dry unless we knew that the sweep was done right. The sweep was done. That was key for us. That's kind of where our timeline started for we're going to our initial point.
So you're not going to head to sweep yourself with a sidewinder? You're going to leave it up to Leakster and Siphon?
We were just kids up there, having some fun.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll just launch some preventative Phoenixes. Just kind of send them out there. They'll pick up something on the way.
Leakster, Siphon, I'm not impressed with your Phoenix. I got 2 9s on the wing, so you guys can, you can hold back a little bit. I'm going to take the lead on this.
There we go.
Ice is sitting there going, we're going to turn right 90 degrees, and we'll watch from a distance.
Yeah, we'll let that play out. You guys finish it.
Tell me how it works out, right?
I can tell you, the first strike I went on in Iraq at night, was early in Desert Storm. There were SAM rings all over the place. Big, it was just multi-layered SAM threat. And our little tar cap, we had 2 divisions of F-14s on the other side of the A6s that were going in to drop these bombs. And I think the A6s were carrying, 10 of them were carrying 24 500-pounders, and 4 of them were carrying 4 1,000-pound LGBs. The EA6s came in, and they hit the target first with the jamming and the launching of the harms. And this is all at night, of course. And the harms were super impressive, like I said earlier. They went up into space. They're just like watching a rocket ship go up into space, and they come down and hammer, not just the targets that they plan, but any radars that turn on, too, they're capable of engaging. And, as a fighter division, you were offset to the target, and we were on the edge of the SAM envelopes. And the A6s, of course, once those harms start coming down on the target, now the AAA lights up, because now the bad guys are upset because there's a lot of explosions going off. So the fireworks begin, and they just start launching SAMs, unguided even. And the A6s go diving right into the heart of these SAM envelopes. Now, this is a non-afterburning airplane that, frankly, is just looks like it's an overweight guy.
Careful, this is Roller's ride right now. Careful.
Easy now. I'm body changing. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
This is what's getting Roller back to mid-rats later.
The A6 guys didn't have a body image problem, that's for sure. So they roll in there right into this heart of these SAMs and all this AAA, and they're dropping their bombs as high as they can, which still were pretty low, down 14, 15,000 feet or so. And then they pitch out of there with no afterburner, and they're trying to haul butt and get out of Dodge, right? And we're over here circling around on the side watching this show. And I never saw more courage in my life than watching these A6 guys drop bombs on that mission. I was incredibly impressed with the training that our pilots received and how well that these guys executed that mission in what I consider to be an incredibly challenging environment. It was dark. There's no moon. There's stuff flying everywhere. None of us have ever been in combat before, because nobody had been in combat for 20 years before that day.
And you guys weren't on NVGs. No one was on NVGs then, right?
Well, the guys that were on MVGs, which they didn't have enough goggles to go around, right? And the few guys that had MVGs came back and said, I wish I didn't have these things, because I could see a lot more bullets than the guys who had them, who didn't have them.
Yeah, they're just going out there.
Suddenly you're seeing what you don't want to see.
Yeah, it was very unpleasant. We had a couple vectors on some
Unpleasant.
MiGs and some other things like that as F-14s, but in generally you pointed your radar at somebody in an F-14 and they would run away, because of the amount of energy that radar put out would scare the pants off of them. So they would try to bug out.
And they were pretty familiar with seeing F-14s for quite a number of years anyway.
Right, with the Iranians. And I think that's why they were afraid of them, because I think there were some kills in that war too. But
oh, yeah.
And to go on that note, Now, bugging out was was probably one of the scariest parts of it, because your time on target was so critical. I mean, what was it, guys? Was it like if you couldn't make it TOT plus or minus 10, you were bored, right? Something like that. So and then I remember flying over downtown Sarajevo when that was going on, and I mean, you had to be where you needed to be, because there were planes all over the place. You had to be on altitude. You had to know your egress plan. That was the scariest part. Because maybe
without
because
GPS,
so focused on the mission at that point. Now the mission's over. Now, holy shit! I didn't see all these airplanes around here before. But yeah, that was quite. I mean, I remember guys telling me stories. Their egress, and all of a sudden the Hornet or a Tomcat lights their AB right in front of them. They didn't even see them there. Scares the heck out of them.
Oh yeah, or your radar altimeter goes off and you roll upside. I rolled up on a wing and my radar altimeter went off, and I looked, and I'm looking right in the cockpit of an A6 right below me at night.
Yeah.
Wow.
And the reason I knew he was there is because I happened to fly right over the top of him, and my
because the A6 was below you. That's why. Because we were
right, as usual.
That's right. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, tanking was one of the most dangerous parts of the evolution, because you had 30 people all going to the same piece of sky. So it's pretty varsity. So back to the strike. So now we're off target and everybody's heading back. And again, Roller said that, and this is the way I remember a lot of the strikes I was on, that you went to the tanker at least once, usually just once, and got enough gas to get yourself back to the ship. And now you're stacked up overhead and waiting to trap. The order that we did it in back in the day, if I remember right, was they had a couple F-14s, at least in my air wing, and I know it's different everywhere, which is really interesting. But we have a couple of F-14s on the bottom in case there was a foul deck,
right?
And then the Hornets would all trap, and then the A6s, and then the EA6s, then the S3, and then the E2. How'd you guys set it up, Biff, on your air wings when you were running the show?
Yeah, basically the same one. So usually you had like a sacrificial Hornet or a sacrificial Tomcat land first, just to get it down and make sure everything was good. And then the same order as you mentioned. We're always last.
Yeah, when I had my squadron, I actually got us into the mix to get down to the bottom of that stack, just to buy my guys a little more turnaround time as well. So basically the same guys that Tomcat had. Actually, in my command tour, we didn't have Tomcats; it was all Rhinos and Hornets. So she might as well put the Prowler down there and gives me a little more turnaround time when we get on deck first, which helps. And then gas wise, we're same shape as a Super Hornet. So.
Well, the last plane actually was always a tanker, because a tanker there'd always be a tanker at what was it 2000, bird dogging, traps all the time. We'd be doing these tight orbits on the port side of the carrier.
I'm a yo-yo tanker.
Yeah, every time the you want to time it so that just as you're just forward of the wing, as soon as they touch down, in case they bolted, that you would be right there in front of them. They could tank right in front. You had the shootout. You get the shootout right away, and they could tank from you if they needed to tank.
So, Ice, you guys had yo-yo Rhinos then, right?
We did, yeah. Yep.
How did those guys feeling about being tanker guys? Was that weird, or was that
fighter tankers?
It was just the nature of the beast. Each squadron had a couple of jets loaded out with 5 wet, and they were primarily tankers.
We actually had most of the time our 5 wet guys were our. Who did we have on CAG Ops? We had a S3 pilot and a Hornet pilot, and they were usually the guys. They didn't have enough mission. They weren't flying frequently enough, and so they were often the guys flying the 5 wet tanker, because that was easy for them to do, and it just got them some time.
I always thought it would be a fun mission, because
there's an art form to being a good tanker pilot too.
Totally.
To execute that hawk properly, I mean, you've got to be in the right spot at the right time. Hell, first time we were tanking off Rhinos and we had to hit the tanker off a daggum bolter, we came up and the knucklehead had his daggum hook down. Talk about a shot cold urine to the heart. Like, what the
Oops.
hell is that doing there? I don't want to see that. Hey, can you put that away?
Put that away.
Yeah. No, I think it's your kind of anxiety when you have to use a tanker. Let's say there's something bad happens, whether it's an emergency or you're having a bad night at the ship. And when you have to go to that tanker at night that's been hawking you, there's this deep-seated fear that that thing isn't going to work.
Yeah.
Right?
Which has happened.
Yeah.
And then now you're put into a situation where, you know, they're going to barricade you or they're going to eject. You're going to have to do a controlled ejection or whatever. And of course, you know, sometime in the 90s, they decided they didn't want to do these barricades anymore, which I think was a good decision because they killed a couple of people thinking, oh, they're low on gas, we'll just use a barricade, and it didn't work out. And so they said, okay, we're just going to do controlled ejections. Now, as a pilot, I can't think of a worse nightmare than to have to, you know, toss an airplane in the ocean because the tanker didn't work or you couldn't get aboard or whatever. The scenario sounds horrible to me.
Well, normally now, I don't know if this was the case back then, but normally now we do a package check on the tanker just to make sure it's working, and then they'll get another one up if they have to. So hopefully it's still working after the package check.
We did the package check. We also had some self-tests in there that, you know, if the lights are all blinking in order, that we'd know that we had at least a good system working. Now, whether gas was flowing or not, that's what you do the package check for. But I remember quite a few times you get up and, you know, the lights weren't blinking in the right order, and, you know, we were dry.
Mm-hmm.
You know? So then they had to launch the other tanker, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those airplanes are old, you know, and the maintenance guys did great work with them. Great work. But
so the other thing is that I think a lot of folks don't realize about launching a tanker is that, and I'm sure that you saw this, Biff, is that when you're in a bad weather situation and you've got folks that can't get aboard because you're in a bad sea state, you know, the deck's pitching or it's raining and you're in and out of weather. When you have to launch a tanker to help people that are low on fuel, you've just complicated your problem because you just added another airplane that's got to get back aboard the ship.
That's true.
And you guys, certainly downstairs, everyone's having the discussion, you know, are we going to divert or are we going to complicate our problem? I mean, have you guys experienced those conversations, Ice or Biff? I've never been in that room when that conversation's happening.
Actually, I could complicate it quick and just tell you the strike package has returned. They're in Marshall stack, but only there's one issue. The boat has pitching deck going on. What are you guys' experiences with that? That's an interesting scenario in the dark that no matter what, like Lisa said, controlled ejection, trapping is everything. Especially when it's up to you. You guys have any like pitching deck stories to say? There's no way you don't.
No.
Put your diapers on and tell the story.
Yeah, I had a strike group commander that believed that this was in Japan. So he believed whenever we were going to have to deal with our friends over there, that they were going to pick the worst time of year, which was going to ensure that it was going to be pitch and deck. So we were going to be daggum sure we knew how to fly in pitch and deck. And he went to find the worst possible weather whenever he could to force us to fly in pitch and deck conditions. And we spent 3 weeks off the west coast of Australia on one deployment.
Yep.
For that specific purpose, was to force the air wing to learn to fly successfully in pitch and deck. So sitting, you know, kind of off Perth, a little north of Perth there. It was so daggum rough that our destroyers pulled into port. They said it was too rough to stay out there. They couldn't handle it. They were getting beat to death. So the Australians came out and did plane guard for us.
Wow.
But yeah, we a light day was 10 foot of pitch and deck. It was all Movis all day. So, you know, the LSOs in the crowd know that's a huge, you know, manually operated visual landing aid system that's hugely LSO intensive to learn how to do that. So we had a bunch of young LSOs learning how to manage Movis, learning how to manage the air wing. And then we had a whole bunch of folks, you know, we were fresh Super Hornet air wing, so there was a lot of learning, flying Super Hornets in pitching deck, which hadn't been happening. They didn't think you could actually, what's an 804 is the
804 and 803.
803s and 804s. 804s, they didn't think you'd ever pop an 804.
Right.
And we did 7 804s in one night.
Wow.
First night of pitching deck. So we, guys were getting
that's
on deck, but
that's a hard landing.
Guys were landing hard, but we just kept, and we'd get to points, we'd have to send some folks to the beach. We were close enough to the beach, so we had an option to send folks to the beach if you just couldn't get guys aboard. But over time, like I said, dude's name is Hound Dog McLean, great American, was the strike group commander, and
Awesome.
he said, you know what? You can tell your grandkids you were here. You remember this is W.W. Hound Dog. He's a great American from Oklahoma. And we actually, believe it or not, we actually got to where we could function, day in and day out in these sea states. But it was the craziest daggum thing, walking out to the jet every day, every night, just day after day after day, knowing what you're going to get into. So
yeah, I think you've got one thing, Ice, is that every time that you had pitching deck and moveless, it was night. It was dog squeeze weather. 2 wires out of battery.
It all seems to come together for whatever reason.
What do you mean there's only a 3-wire?
Right.
Taxi one wire is a good thing because it gives you more chances to catch the wire.
That's what we only have 2 wires working right now tonight. Yeah, that's how it works out. I did the same thing above the Arctic Circle. We were operating off of Norway. This is during the Cold War. Russian bears coming around, and the sea states were horrible. And it was pretty miserable. I mean, especially, of course, at night. And as a pilot, you're watching the destroyer next to you go down underwater up to the literally the thing's going underwater up to the superstructure and then coming out like a U-boat. And you're operating off the carrier thinking, why are we doing this? But in retrospect, I honestly think that it must have scared the pants off the Russians, because we operated there 24 hours a day. We were flying off of the ship during a huge NATO exercise. We're right up there in the North Atlantic, and we're like, look what we can do. We can do this anywhere and anytime we want. And there's nobody else in the world that can do that. Yeah. There literally is nobody else. Other countries have aircraft carriers, but they do not operate in those conditions like our aircraft carriers do. So I think it's a demonstration of power projection that is above and beyond just actually seeing what bombs and cruise missiles can do. It's, hey, we can actually sit in your backyard. I don't care what the weather is. We're going to be here.
We got to give props to our maintainers, because they're putting jets up on jacks in the hangar bay, because they still got to do drop checks in that weather. They still got to do all the regular maintenance, and then they're doing it under massively moving deck conditions.
We were in
centerline spots in the hangar bay were a premium.
Right.
Yeah. ice on the deck, blowing snow, and the guys have got chains on the airplane and walking with the chains with the airplane as you're taxiing, because when it would roll and slide, they could just throw it down on a tie down to keep you from sliding off the side of the ship. It was varsity stuff. I mean, it scared the pants off me just taxiing around on the ship. So,
Leeks, you're going back to the mission. I had the privilege of flying in the Air Force for Vipers. That was a lot of fun doing that. But those guys always busted my chops, because they're like, Roller, you're always worried about coming back and landing, the landing is something you do after the mission. And I always felt, no, landing is part of the mission.
Amen, brother.
I'm not picking on them because of that. That's the culture over there. But, landing is part of the mission. So our mission is not over until all the chicks are, back in bed, So that was a big part of it. Planning that stack, and who was going to come aboard when, and the fuel situation, and the alert tankers, and all that stuff. That's all part of the mission.
It's all that admin. How does it get done to make the actual mission happen? It is what it is. Biff, I was going to ask you, a similar position to me. Obviously, you couldn't see out the front of the aircraft as well, but we had to rely on our. Yeah, I was trying to be Generous.
It's a circuit breaker panel.
Right.
You should have just opened the canopy like the A6 guys.
But I remember there were some days when we're checking into Marshall and you were doing the same thing, and you're aware of the sea state and you're aware of the conditions, and you're like, there's very little I could do here. I mean, I can call out some. In my case, I could call out some numbers and I could be a little bit helpful. There's a whole lot of, I got to trust the guy in front. Guys in front in your case. What does that make you feel like when you're coming back from a mission, knowing that
I think in the Hawkeye, having two pilots in the front, obviously it's a 80-foot wingspan. You've got basically 4 feet either side of center line, and you're hitting something. So you really got to put it right on the middle. And that's there for a lot of Hawkeye pilots early on, and they've gotten from the 90s on, they became most of them became much more mission oriented also, but that was what they lived for, was the landing. So there was a lot of great coordination, a lot of great training in that, because it was really pretty much the hardest airplane to land, but after the whale went away, I guess. So from the back, you're watching altimeters and watching where you are in the back, but pretty much you're not saying a word.
And your systems are completely secured at that point, right?
At that point, yeah, they're all off. We might have scopes on or something, depending on if there's something else going on, or if you're the last flight and there may be somebody else doing something. But if you're the last one down, yeah, you're turning everything off and cooking the vapor cycle, because you had to cook for 10-15 minutes before you could turn everything off. So all of that was pretty much off. Your radios are still on and everything, but that was the beauty of having two pilots in the front.
Well, sitting in the back with no windows, I assume that you're just judging his course corrections by what's actually going on outside the airplane right now, as far as lineup. He's making a lot of corrections. You're probably sweating bullets back there.
That, and you're catching a few winks.
Yeah, because I'm even thinking pitching deck, sitting in the back of the plane and pitching deck, and in the dark.
You'd be surprised how much those guys would probably nod off back there after that, because they've
absolutely.
been working.
Yeah, burned out. Yeah.
It's incredible. It's incredible.
Well, I mean, everybody, you think about, and I'm sure a lot of you guys did, your staterooms are on the 03 level, right on the 88th Street, right under the JVD, and you can sleep through anything if you're sitting under, you're 10 feet under the JVD, and the thing's going up, and an A6 goes up, or Tomcat in burner, and you can sleep through it. It's pretty incredible. So
the E2 just trapped. That is the last aircraft aboard. We're going to call this mission complete. We're going to go down to Wardroom 3 and hit some debrief over Midrats, right?
Oh yeah. Well,
if it's a larger strike, I'm sure there's a debrief first and then Midrats.
Well, you have to argue about which guy's going to go to the debrief.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Who locked up the airliner? But
right.
So with the airplane secured now, you guys are below decks, debrief, and all the good stuff, and going over everything. At this point, the airframes are turned back over to the maintainers. Ken, Brian, what's it like to receive the airplane back from a mission? Like he says, the turnaround, getting the prowler down as soon as you can. Guys can get back on it and start the process of turning it back around. So what's involved with that, Brian, Ken?
Well, being up on deck, you always wanted to see that Rio in the backseat of the Tomcat give the thumbs up from front and rear. And if he didn't, then it was hunt down the flight deck chief and find out what the heck's down about the aircraft. And at that point, it was elbows up and let's get going and figure out what the heck we got to do, because there's probably going to be another flight real soon. it was checking servicing, and just get the jet cleaned back up and fix whatever needed to be done.
Sure, recharge nitrogen, set it all back up, and then again, like you said, the orders will start to come back around, and everyone will reset it back up for the next mission, which is already planned in cycle. From there, the whole thing all over again. They're downstairs and woohoo, it's all good. The next morning, they wake up your air crews. It's back to mission planning and briefing again, because everything we discussed tonight is going to happen again tomorrow night. It'll be a whole different mission, a whole different target, a whole different. And this is something that I find to be amazing. And you guys all have amazing careers. It's spectacular, honestly. And to hear you guys collectively all work together and talk about it, I think that's what makes our country so great. It's what makes our flag fly so high. It's that, like Leekster said, you know, they spent all this money and all of this training and a little bit of water, whether the seas are high or not, it's not going to stop the courage instilled in the training and the skill to make these airplanes do their job 100%. And again, awesome job, everyone. Incredible. Thank you. Honestly, on behalf of everybody, thank you for your service and everything that, you know, went into it. Blood, sweat, and tears. It's very much appreciated.
Well, I'll say, even as I guess the most junior air crew here, to Biff and Ice and Roller, and certainly Leekster, you guys were my heroes. I got into aviation because of what you guys did. So thank you for joining us tonight.
I think
it was a pleasure, man. It was
we did the same for guys before us too. I mean
that is exactly right, Biff.
I always look at just anytime you watch a World War II movie and you think about torpedo bomber squadrons going off and what navigation systems they had that they could go off and then find the carrier back again after all that they were doing. It's just that's just amazing.
It's amazing. They were people just like you, guys just like you, and took their machines, which were state of the art at the time, and took them into battle with the same courage that you guys did. Again, like you said.
I don't know if it's courage or naivety. Looking back on it,
it's a very good point.
Might have been some alcohol involved.
The naivety.
Might have been a pint of whiskey in the flight suit.
Young and bulletproof.
That's it.
A young man's game. Young man.
How do you want to finish this up, Lorenzo? I mean, these guys have been up.
Yeah, I mean,
for a while. It's East Coast. It's pretty late for them. So, what? Anything else you want to throw in here?
Let's run through them again one more time, and if there's anything they want to plug or say or anything, Ice, you want to mention Spartan or anything like that?
I know Roller's got some more stories, guaranteed.
No, I think we talked about what we're doing with Spartan. That's just a bunch of us, retired aviators, kind of taking a lot of things we talked about tonight, and looking to apply that in the human organization performance, and leadership coaching kind of realm. So just getting started. Folks want to check out our website, SpartanTP.com, and just kind of see what we got going on. I think you'll see some familiar faces on there, and I'm pretty excited about it. But thanks for inviting me to join in this forum. As you can figure out, I love flapping my gums about what we do in naval aviation. It was awesome. Probably the greatest opportunity that ever landed in my lap as a young man, and really shaped my life. And like sharing that with other folks out there, and just getting the chance to sit around and jaw with guys like you, kind of takes me back to the day as well. So appreciate that from y'all.
And Spartan is it based in Colorado, or where are you guys based? I know you're working with the University of Alabama? Is that correct?
Yeah, we're working a program with the University of Alabama, Birmingham. Still working through the details on that, so more to follow. But yeah, it's and then working directly with different companies and different industries with a focus on like I said, leadership and the human and organizational performance. So.
Yeah, I mean, you guys would find what they're doing is super interesting. I mean, they're basically taking what Roller mentioned earlier. They're taking all the learnings that they took out of the Navy, everything that they took from leadership and all the experience of all the deployments and working with. I mean, that's the amazing thing about the military, right? For a guy like Ice, is even as a younger man, you're put in charge and put in a leadership position where you know, luckily you're given some training in the Naval Academy or in NROTC, and then you come in and you're thrown in the fire and have to deal with these kind of things. And now they've taken all those lessons learned, and they're basically using them in the corporate environment now. Is that right?
Yeah, that's pretty much it in a nutshell.
If you can run a fleet with it and apply that to a business, it's a proven success. And it's a proven success where it saves lives initially, and then he's taking that and implementing that into a professional world where the same thing applies. Yeah, you know, I talked to Tongue about it on the last episode and off the show. Spartan's got some great angles. Motivation is the key to anything in life. It's the key to what we're doing tonight. It's motivation. These guys are some of the smartest people on the planet. They're naval aviators. Second to that, Spartan's a really great thing they're doing right now. I really have to say that honestly.
Yeah, we're pretty excited about it.
And Biff, our E2 guy.
So I retired about 5 years ago. I did my last 7 years were CEO of Atsugi Japan for 3 years, and then over in Naples, Italy for 3.5 on the region staff over there, and did some time in Romania, set up a base over there. So moved back here, and actually been doing real estate for the last 5 years. I'm a broker with Remax Alliance, and basically all my clients are either veterans or active duty, and I do a thing where I provide a reward back after closing. A portion of the commission goes back to the sailor or the
Nice.
veteran.
Awesome.
So last year was I think I gave back $54,000 to my clients, and over the last 4 years, 3.5 years now, it's been about 140,000 back to them. So, you know, working with a E4, E5 first-time home buyer, giving them something, you know, a check for between $1,600 and $2,000 back after closing, buys a refrigerator, buys a new
that's
washer,
amazing
dryer,
feeling.
gets some new
That's
flooring. So that's been good. I'm also I started a chapter of a nonprofit called the Veterans Association of Real Estate Professionals. It's a national nonprofit, but I run the Hampton Roads chapter, and we teach veterans in active duty about their VA loan, making sure they understand it, and then also teach other realtors and lenders to make sure that they're not steering veterans away from using their VA loan. So
That's cool.
That's an awesome mission.
So you know, profit side, nonprofit side, but all of it is to help veterans understand their benefits, utilize their benefits to their maximum. Some of them are, you know, you get some O1 or, you know, O2 SEALs or E5, E6 guys that are really up to it, and, you know, are buying fourplexes and living in one, renting out the other three, house hacking, doing lots of great stuff. Others are first-time home buyers and you know, just saving just enough to get in, and it's been pretty neat. I've had clients that are, you know, 2 years ago I had 3 single E3 females buy homes.
Awesome.
Wow.
And, you know, saved up enough, you know, or being able to utilize their VA loan with nothing down, and get the seller to pay their closing costs, and they basically walk in, and it's been rewarding to do that. I'm never thought I'd be doing it. I don't really enjoy the real estate part of it, but it's great being able to work with veterans and active duty, and being able to you know,
help them provide those opportunities.
Set them on a path to financial freedom.
Yeah, connect them to the opportunities that you're aware of, maybe they're not,
Yeah.
and it makes a difference in people's lives.
So if you got anybody, you know, moving to Hampton Roads, I'll help them out.
If you paint
That's really nice.
Vandy 1 black again, I'll come down.
Plus, you get them started early, and that's the best thing, man.
Yeah,
That's really
start
nice.
them young, and absolutely. All right, Roller, Tony, don't make me regret this.
Yeah.
What are you doing nowadays, sir? Is it going to be different from what Leaster tells me?
Oh, Roller's amazing. Tell
No.
them what you did before concurrently with your airline job, because that was a very impressive. And Roller actually worked with my son, my oldest son.
Yeah, well, let me finish. I finished up my my military career. I actually got out, and when I was in the Air Force, I got out at 20, and then I got called back in. Well, they asked me to come back in. I went down to the schoolhouse down in Montgomery, and they wanted me to write doctrine. They were looking for a Navy fighter guy who flew, combat missions and also had some fighter experience in the Air Force. And so I ended up writing an ACSC book, that war college book called Counter C. I believe it is a good read, let me tell you.
Wow. Wow.
The love scenes are the best, of course.
Oh, yeah. It's right up there with the New York Times bestsellers. But anyways, so I got that. I did that, and I made some connections, and I went started a business with a couple of my buddies. We basically flight schools, all general aviation stuff. We had FBO, fuel farm. We had a couple maintenance shops, multiple locations. We had anywhere from 12 aircraft at one time. And
how many airplanes?
Anywhere from 12 to 20. Depending, because some were leased. And they're during the winter. It was
Roller had his own squadron, basically.
And we did that, and then I got connected. One of the things that I sit on a bunch of volunteer boards. One of the big ones I sit on is I'm the chair of the advisory board for Kent State University, of which my son is a freshman in right now. He's
awesome. Congratulations.
And if ever you guys want to come up to snowy, cold Northeast Ohio, we're always looking for aviation guest speakers, and you guys would be welcome tremendously there. But we work primarily with working with the professor. Well, I work with the dean, so on big pictures, the big picture stuff with the board and the provost and all this stuff. But the board members, they work real closely with professors and constructing
the flight program at Kent State
curriculum to meet industry needs. That's what an industry advisory board are. And we help with them. I just got interviewed again. Every few years I get interviewed as chair to keep the accreditation programs, because everything's got to be accredited now to get into these to get hired anywhere. Kids, I mean, the industry is really looking for accredited programs for people to graduate from. So, and I'm a captain at Delta Airlines. If I was flying my butt off today in an O'Hare, which I hate. I hate O'Hare. Yeah, I hate O'Hare. I hate O'Hare.
Windy City in the winter.
And I've had multiple jobs there. I was in the pilot office and standards and training and all that stuff there. So that's what I do.
Yeah, and he's an exotic dancer.
I knew it was coming.
Right.
Well, he had a hip replacement like 3 years ago.
So are you the Delta airplane with the chrome pole in it?
That's not how that happened, okay? But yes.
I saw that picture on Facebook.